Good afternoon, buenas tardes, annyeonghaseyo. Just 2 words to begin. London calling. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and it comes as no surprise to me that the UK continues to be one of the leading centres within the so-called World Republic of Letters. Few other countries, few other cities provide such a warm welcome and offer as vibrant a context to the exquisite melting pot of today's world literature. I want to thank the British Council, the Publishers Association, and of course, the London Book Fair for opening their doors to all of us today. And on a personal note, I must say that I'm thrilled to be standing in this particular crossroads between South Korea, the UK, and Mexico. As Julio said, I am Mexican, but I spent 4 years of my childhood in South Korea and another 4 in a British school in South Africa, so I feel somewhat at home in this triple intersection. I'm particularly honored to be sharing an evening with Lee Sung-woo, but he's not here. That's what I wrote, but he's not here. And Hwang Sok-young instead delayed his speech. But Lee Sung-woo's book was published in Mexico, The Private Life of Plants, and as have many other significant South Korean writers. And drawing from the writers that I've been able to read in the past years, I can say that South Korean literature is one of the most remarkable in recent times. It is not shy of humor, and I'm thinking here of the short stories of Park Min-gyu. It does not lack emotional and intellectual depth, enough to mention Shin Kyung-suk's haunting novel, Please Look After Mom. And it's nonconformist and not afraid to take language to its limits in an exploration that is simultaneously playful and serious. The only thing perhaps that South Korean literature is missing is many, many more readers worldwide. All of these things are also true of Mexican literature. It is my hope that spaces such as the London Book Fair will push isolated endeavors further and help consolidate them into common practices. It is my hope also that the words that we exchange tonight and those that have been exchanged during these last few days will indeed strengthen cultural ties between countries whose geographies and linguistic boundaries tend to pull in opposite directions. So when the Mexican poet and essayist Octavio Paz received the Nobel Prize in the year 1990, he said that Latin American writers were in constant search for the present. For us Spanish Americans, he stated, the real present was not in our own countries. It was the time lived by others, by the English, the French, the Germans. For someone of my generation, I was born in the 80s, Octavio Paz's dictum seems like a distant and almost inaudible echo from the past. Although Latin American modernity has always been and still is marked with contradictions, I cannot think of a region today where the sense of a present and not search of a present is more incontestably alive. What do I mean by this? Well, the foundational myths of Mexican literature, as is the case more generally with early Latin American literature, were a result of 2 elements: an inward-looking gaze, and on the other, a gaze fixed on Europe and the United States, both working in constant productive tension to create a discourse that would fix a solid sense of national identity, one that could help consolidate these newly emergent, forward-looking nations while it came to terms with the country's pre-colonial past. This is of course a great simplification, and it's not my intention to lecture anyone, but only sketch a very general panorama. In literary chronology, I am speaking particularly of the times of foundational fictions and national allegories, which had a final expression with the writers of the boom generation. So for a very long time, and well into the 20th century, the Mexican government played an essential role in kickstarting and sustaining cultural sectors such as the publishing industry. However, this involvement came at a relative cost. The arts became part of a program which had in turn to return in cultural capital what the government invested in resources. For a long time, therefore, literature was seen as one of the fundamental blocks of nation building. But literature cannot and should not have a program. What has happened since then? What is the panorama today? The old philanthropic ogre, as Paz used to call the Mexican state, now has less of a grip on local cultural production and functions more as a gentle scaffolding than a foundational pillar. This, in turn, has given leeway for a more diverse, less unidirectional literary culture. Mexico, once a country that programmatically engaged in nation-building discourses and saw local art as a means to the specific end of establishing a sense of national identity, is now in a state of confusion, of wonderful, productive, dynamic confusion. I'm not sure if we have caught up with the present, or the present has caught up with us, but I cannot think of a less interesting project during recent generations than to write about our national identity or our so-called modernity. One can no longer speak of a Mexican literature, even if some discourses still tend to favor soft-boiled essentialisms. Mexican literature is not in search of a present, it is thoroughly invested in its present. It is all about the sense of a present. And grasping the present is like trying to grasp at water. I am confident that the more Mexican literature is read, the less clear it will be to everyone what Mexican literature really is. And this is a good thing, a happy ending of sorts, as anything that can be pigeonholed is not worth trying to understand. Of course, Mexico presently bears the wounds of almost a decade of war. A war that seems as unfathomable and ridiculous to Mexicans as it does to those who view it from outside. But it is also true that difficult times often coincide with moments of artistic flourishing. I would say, without fear of indulging in any form of exaggeration, that during these challenging years, Mexico has experienced a new splendor in its traditionally lively literary scene. In the past years, many young independent publishers have made the transition from garage-style endeavors to solid groups of highly qualified professionals. Their commitment to finding and publishing local talents, as well as to translating past and contemporary foreign works, is rapidly giving rise to one of the most diverse and eclectic, but also most solid scenarios for today's literature. The level of their commitment, moreover, runs parallel to the long-standing efforts of the more established members of the publishing industry, both public and private, independent and transnational. So what do we have today? Publishing houses, translators, distributors, critics, bloggers, bookstores, magazines, readers, teachers, students. That complex ecosystem of reading and writing, fueled by the work of a large and highly diverse new generation of writers who are writing not about a congealed idea of themselves and their country, but about the many simultaneous presents in which we live. As the young British author Adam Thirlwell has written, and with this I'll finish, the novel is an international object par excellence. I would extend this to literature as an art form in general. Literature travels. It is kept alive through translation, and as an art form, it is kept alive through translation and finds itself in translation. Next year you will be seeing many Mexican writers, translators, editors, and publishers in action. Hopefully you will read the most relevant works they produce in translation. They've all heard London's call, and would perhaps subscribe to these final words I would like to borrow from T.S. Eliot. We should not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring, we'll be able to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valeria.